everyone. It's episode 366 of This is Whole Life, and we have gone into new waters again. It's a new series. It's a special guest, and it's 5 people in the studio this week, including our special guest, who was the featured speaker this week in our new series.
I don't want to contradict you, but there's actually 6 people in here.
Oh, well, there is 6, but you
only 5 with microphones.
Would you stop with the math? Okay, because like I'm
not Randy's
I've
strong
been I've been open to the fact that math is not my strong point.
Math or counting?
Well, maybe both. We won't go too far to that. So, Rachelle, this morning we have one thing else to get to, but I want to before we start to do anything else because I'll forget. You kind of laid out a little bit of who you were this morning in your message, but for those that haven't listened or might not catch the message, why don't you introduce yourself to our podcast audience and just give them a little glimpse about who is Rachelle Wetmore other than Ken Wetmore's wife? Because I get a lot with you're Heather's husband.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, great.
Yeah,
thanks.
naturally.
Yeah,
Which is good.
I'm sure you get that a lot, Randy. I'm sure it's not Heather getting, you're the podcast guy's wife, right? I'm sure that's not it.
I have a story to tell you later, but yeah, yeah.
Bonus episode.
There we go. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh man, that's a big task. So my name's Rachelle Wetmore, and lots of things. I'm a teacher. I'm a mom. I'm a wife. I'm a daughter. I'm a middle child. I talked about that today a little bit. I'm an introvert, but I also enjoy people, and I especially really love children. I've loved children. I recognize differently than pretty much everyone else, but I just enjoy working with kids and their honesty, and I don't know, I like kids.
Can I say that you hide your introvert self really well? Like I would have never guessed when I first met you, and we haven't interacted a ton, but at the same time, when Ken has mentioned that you're more of an introvert, and then I'm like, I started seeing more and more like correlations to my wife, who some people don't always guess that, but in her heart, it's like, I love people. I love being around people. That's enough. That's enough. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I feel like church probably sees more introvert than work does, because I have to perform at work, if you want to call it that. And so I got
to perform too. Have you met my boss? Man.
So,
I get you.
But I have been. People have said that before.
On that performance thing, totally get it. Okay, before we get started and dive into the message and the rest, we got an email from which I found out just about an hour ago that it's a new member of the WholeLife Church. She's a regular online chat contributor and regular podcast listener, Erin.
Hey, Erin.
Yay, Erin.
Oh, Erin Young.
Yeah. And so they were voted in today, new members. So that was cool. And Tim and Melanie, you're official.
We got voted in today too.
Yeah.
I'm so relieved.
We were all relieved.
We were all relieved about that.
I will say during staff meeting there was an awful lot of extra discussion about that, so I don't know how to feel about that. But thanks for finally voting us in. But yes, now I guess we're official, and Aaron and Pylander.
Yeah.
Highlander,
are official also. So
Hashtag officially official.
Yes.
We had a number of people that were joining today.
I feel like we've spent a lot of time in staff meeting. For those that don't know, we do that in staff meeting and go through all the new people coming in, and it's been. I feel like every week for the last couple. Like a month or better have been people coming in, so it's good news.
Yeah.
So her email said, I wanted to chime in with my top picks in the Chronicles of Narnia books.
Here we go.
So here we go. In my opinion, best book of the series is Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
Okay.
Number 2 goes to The Magician's Nephew. And then third place.
Getting colder as we go.
And then third place, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And she just, for what it's worth, she said, definitely read the books over watching the movies, because the movie for Voyage of the Dawn Treader leaves out the best part of the story, in my opinion.
For sure.
So
I wonder what the best part is in her opinion. I wonder if it's the part where Aslan slices the dragon.
Hashtag spoiler alert.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, for those of us who, haven't read the books or seen the movie.
Get on it, Randy.
Have you
had
read
a
the
whole
books?
week.
I'm a Wetmore.
So that's required reading as a Wetmore?
I mean, yes. But I mean, Ken and I actually started reading the books. I had never read them until I started dating Ken. But then Ken and I read them together when we were dating. And then my children have pretty much memorized them, listened to them over and over. My daughter has had extensive conversations with peers. And so it's a pretty
I think you and I just became besties. I haven't read the books either until I met Ken.
Just to be clear, we're not dating, Miranda. Just to be clear.
I will be reading the books. So I think these I might.
They're good.
I may actually get these on. I might do the John Monday and do the ebook on this. Seems like the thing to do.
It's not a bad idea.
Yeah. Just because whatever. Easy.
If it were me, I would listen to the audiobooks.
Oh, that's right. You did mention that last week. Audio.
Yeah, we have them all.
We may have the CD series that you could borrow.
Oh.
After all, you have let me borrow some things. So
Wait, CDs? What's a CD?
I know.
I still have ways to
this metallic, shiny
disky
disc
thing. I still have the hardware to turn that into an MP3. So
I don't know what the copyright is on that, but I mean at this point,
copy what?
Yeah, okay.
I copy.
You copy?
I will copy.
I don't know.
Right. Copy the copy. Here we go.
The views of some people on this show are not endorsed by WholeLife Church
or any of its subsidiaries. Okay, so I really resonated with your message because the more I listened, the more I kept thinking about how Heather has described herself and described different situations in her life, and realizing that being that caregiver personality. And there's so often I feel like, well, Ken and I know by the DISC assessment that we're like nearly twins when it comes to how we're not the caregivers. So
come on, Rachelle, defend me here. If you were in the studio, you would see my wife shake her head and shrug. It's like, yeah, it is. Yeah.
The silence is loud in here.
The shrug of shame.
Well, you did have an associate pastor at one point admire your empathy, and I was curious about that.
Wow. Okay.
This actually could go for a lot longer than normal.
We have Jeff in here for his counseling abilities.
I'm really rethinking this podcast
with the voices of WholeLife.
Yes.
The thing that I was wondering is, what would you tell? Because I think a lot of people end up in it. It may not be always in a family situation. It could be your coworkers. It could be, it could be family members. It could be couples. And you said, I didn't, when Ken was the first person to ask you if you were mad, or that you remembered asking you if you were mad, and finding out about boundaries late in life. And I think I don't think that's abnormal. I think that's probably more normal than we think. And so what would you give, like we just had last week, 2 of our members get married, young members on the AV staff, Matt and Amy. Yes. Mm-hmm. Like, what would you tell someone new that was like, learn, if this is you, learn about boundaries? What would you tell them to look for, or how to find that? Because if it doesn't, or apparently it's not completely obvious, and I don't know what those reasonings are that it's not, when maybe you're one of those people that are feeling that way, or for those of us on the other side, it's not obvious to us that there's a problem, obviously, because you can tell by responses that you're not getting the empathy that you're looking for or the understanding or the patience. So what's your best advice for someone who shouldn't take the long way around?
Well, it's always hard to know what you don't know, right? Yeah. I mean, you've always experienced life in your circumstances and with your perspective. And so it's easy to not know about yourself. So I would say, my advice is be curious about mental health, be curious about emotional and social emotional skills. Brene Brown has amazing books. Mr. Rogers and all his documentaries are also amazing. So I would just, be looking for resources. There's another book called Permission to Feel. There's a book about highly sensitive people. That's really how I started, is when I found myself in a place of burnout. I just started looking for why, and I would go to Google and I would Google in, how do you fix this, or what about this, or how do you, and just start asking. And then there's also a ton of, like a lot of the research I was using for today's sermon was off of like Psychology Today, or I don't know, just a bunch of like medical. I try to make sure that it's at least a medical related thing. And what advice, if I had my marriage to do over again, and knowing where I was starting at and where Ken was starting at, if you can, I think doing a year of counseling proactively to set up good habits would have gone a very, very long way in dealing with the complicated dynamics that you don't even understand of communicating both with him, with extended family, with setting boundaries at the beginning. And so if you are just starting life, that's really what I would do, is I would just do counseling for a good year.
So we're doing it wrong. We're coming to Jeff after the fact when really we should have started with Jeff.
Well,
ask Jeff, is it easier to fix a problem at the beginning or after?
Well, yeah, I've always thought of, matter of fact, I have people now that are actually doing counseling before they get engaged, which I think is healthy, actually.
Yeah.
But you bring up a really, really good point, and that is that a lot of times we think of boundaries as just protectionary. Mm-hmm. Like, I need to protect my family of origin, or I need to protect who I am as an individual, and I set up these boundaries. And they don't learn early on that boundaries are actually much more about defining meaning than they are about establishing protectionary limits. So, to have them start to realize, boundaries not only help me, they help us, and they provide a posture of meaning in our relationship. So I think it's really, really important.
No, I'm glad you said that, because that was my next question for you, is going to be, the word boundaries sounds like an immediate defensive move. I'm setting up boundaries for you, because in my head I'm thinking, well, boundaries, what did I do? What shouldn't I have done? Or where if you're saying that this is proactive and actually like laying the ground rules for the game that everybody agrees to, that's
well, it goes to what Rachelle said in her sermon too. I mean, I think that's the part that Martha had an issue with, is that she had, and she would, and most of us would say that. It's like, well, if I don't do this, how are you all going to get fed? And I think Jesus was helping understand, no, what I'm asking you to do is let me in, like Mary's let me in. And I think the boundaries are not just about keeping people. We usually think about them being walls, but they're actually, if you think about a boundary is actually kind of invisible in a way, right?
Yeah.
It's establishing, a sense of propriety and a sense of jurisdiction, but also you get a chance to say who gets in and who doesn't get in, and what gets in and what doesn't get in. So,
boundaries, I mean, one of the easy ways to think of it is just like, when you're out driving on the road, I mean, there's lines on the road that you can cross over them, but there's going to be problems when you do. And if you stay within the boundaries if there were no lines on the road, imagine the mayhem of, if there was just paved surfaces and everybody just went wherever they went, you'd have mayhem. And so boundaries are actually kind, they're loving. And for some of us who didn't grow up with families that taught us about boundaries, and where we were taught that, as one of my colleagues used to say, that no is a complete sentence. For me, no, in our family, no is just where the bargaining began. That was the start. It's like, okay, we got to know. Now we get to go ahead and discuss what we're really going to do and who's going to do what. And so you can imagine, when you talk about, what you asked Rachelle what she would do over in her marriage, and for the two of us, I mean, we came from kind of almost a perfect storm type of setting. She grew up in a family where she didn't have really boundaries and didn't really have a voice that she felt comfortable using, and where she was told to just get with the program. I came from a family where it was like, we also didn't have boundaries, but it was in a different kind of way. It was like, just you fight for yourself and push for what you need. And so that was my, I'm incredibly assertive, and Rachelle is incredibly not assertive. And so when you get into that situation, what's going to happen? I'm going to walk all over top of Rachelle, because Rachelle is just trying to please and trying to that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And I'm like, perfect. This is what I wanted. And so it's been a real process for the two of us, because I've had to learn not perfect.
Yeah.
Not perfect. I need to, and it's hard and it's ongoing, and it's, it's one of the things that you go into marriage not knowing that you need, and definitely not wanting and not enjoying as you're learning it. But it's definitely one of the things I think that Rachelle has made me a better person, because my personality has always been to walk. If I want it, go get it. And it's everybody else's job to say no and really mean it and almost have to be nasty about it, instead of me trying to read the cues and say, oh, you don't really, you're giving in, but you don't really want to be. That's not good.
I think that's hard, though, for, like you said, when you come from totally different backgrounds. And I was much the same, where it was just like, my mom was always like, well, if you get yourself into trouble, better lean on yourself to get yourself back out. Don't call me. I didn't help you get in. I'm not helping you get out. So, having that attitude, but also not realizing, I think, that how deep. I always knew that Heather was a peacekeeper, but I guess early on, I never understood how deep that sentiment was in her, or how powerful it was, and just how far she would go. I never assumed, because she was so confident in a lot of other ways, and you don't equate that then, and it's not a weakness. Well, maybe it is. I don't know. I don't think it's a weakness. I think it's a great personality trait if you have, like you said, you've got the boundaries and you know what no is, and is it a good time? Is it what God wants for me? Once you've answered kind of all those things and you have that base, but for me, it was just a not realizing just how tender that spot is, and how easily damaged, and how long it takes to repair that damage. And yeah, I would do things differently. If we had a chance to do it again, I know I would, and I'm sure she would too.
Well, there is a lot of conflicts, I think, if you know much about the birth order theory, which it is just a theory, and it's not, used for defining people, but middle children also tend to be very independent. So it does give across this, and that you don't need, and that's honestly when I start to get challenged in this accusing me of being a victim type thing. I'm like, no, I'm not. I don't need you. I don't need anybody. But that's part of the problem, is we are really independent, and we will push people away really quickly because of all of the dynamics. And it's interesting, in Ken's family, there's not a middle child in his family.
Mine either.
So there's only an older child and a younger child. And so that is a huge different dynamic. I don't know what my family would be like if there was only 4 of us, because I was told before my sister was born, which I do not remember, that I would throw tantrums and have big pits and have all this stuff. I don't remember that at all.
Heather was the oldest in her family. There's her brother is the middle, and then a younger sister, but she's 12 years younger. So it was a lot younger. So I don't know if that makes,
I don't know.
If that makes
There's
a
all
difference.
kinds of things. It's interesting.
But what you just said, though, I think that independence, I always saw that as such a strong trait, and it was one of the things that attracted me to Heather, because she was so confident in herself and her abilities and who she was as a person, and specifically spiritually. I always thought that she exuded, a love for Jesus, that she was confident in, and had confidence in what she not only believed, but what she could learn, and she could teach others just by, talking about spiritual things. And that was one of the things that really attracted to me. So for some of us, we just don't put 2 and 2 together, that just because this doesn't always equal this, when like a confidence across the board or different things. But the other thing I wanted to, before we get to questions, that speaking of Martha, I always felt like if Martha had just sat down, that Jesus would have just been like, that would have been another miracle of the meal. I
mean, he didn't know how to make loaves and fish, right?
So I kind of always wondered, like, if that hadn't happened, and this is probably not true, but he needed the story apparently so for Martha to feel that way. But I think go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, Randy, for me, when Rachelle came and started talking to me about her idea for this sermon, when she specifically started talking about the story of Mary and Martha, that where Mary's sitting at Jesus' feet while Martha's slaving away in the kitchen, I'd never really seen it through that lens before. So for me, I really appreciated what Rachelle brought up, because I'd never really seen Martha as a people pleaser. I'd always come at it from the angle that Rachelle talked about, that most people do, is like, oh, Mary has wanted the greater thing, which is to be at Jesus' feet. Shame on you, Martha, for not going in and being at Jesus' feet, which I think there's some validity to that. But I also think it's an interesting thing that maybe Martha was a people pleaser. Maybe she wasn't so much in the kitchen because that's where she wanted to be and because that's where she felt Jesus asking her to be, but because she was trying to make Jesus and the disciples impressed with, look how hard I work for you. Look at all the stuff I'm doing. I'm worthwhile. I'm a good person. I'm worthy of being a part of your inner circle, Jesus. And Jesus said, well, but is that where you want to be? Is that where you feel like I'm asking you to be? Wouldn't you rather be in here with me just like Mary? Because that's what I hear Martha saying. Martha's like, I'd love to sit out there too, but I've got to be, and Jesus said, well, why not? Why not? Who told you had to go into the kitchen?
Well, and I think that's the interesting thing is the Bible does not give a lot of specific details on this. So we don't know what Martha was doing, if she was doing extra cleaning. I know that when I get in my perfectionist, we have company coming and everything has to be perfect, that list can be really long, and it's motivating and whatever, but it's also not necessarily necessary. And so was there a need? I mean, would Jesus was pretty progressive. I mean, would they have all pitched in and just gotten the food ready, sit down and just kept it super simple? Or was there just a lot of extra that she was doing? And so that's kind of the question mark I have, because I don't think Jesus wants us to not be responsible and do things. I just think that sometimes simple is better.
I like what you just said. I thought I was just picturing if, as they were coming, if she just said, hey, Jesus, I'm really feeling a need to provide food here. And I know this is like the role I'm going to take, whether I want to or not. If you just sent the disciples out and said, hey, go get us some food. Martha doesn't need to cook. She needs to be here with the rest of us. It's fun to play with what you think, could have been, might have been.
Maybe somebody would have invented Grubhub earlier. First century Grubhub.
Well, we had to wait 2,000 years because Martha.
Because of Martha. Thanks, Martha.
And also, I just think when people get together, there's so much bonding and social needs being met. And if you are excluding yourself out of that to take care of everybody, you're not actually getting that relational side. And that's a huge miss for you.
Well, it's a huge miss because you're preparing also the very thing that is also going to bring them closer, because we all know that we enjoy hanging out over food and drink and being together. And so she was probably stuck with cleanup too.
Well, that's what I was thinking. As soon as they're done eating, she goes right back to work. And so that's the thing, is you're not ever allowing yourself to have people time, people connection time.
And the other part that I just wanted to touch on, and I was looking at staff here more than you, but what about, how sometimes I think we feel kind of like Martha when it comes to ministry, because it's our job, but if nobody else does it, and then if there's extracurricular things that need to happen off hours and things, and it's like, well, yeah, but that's my job. I work for God, or I work for the church, and so it's expected. And how it can become that same thing where we really don't want to say no, but we certainly aren't like excited to say yes either. Like, sure, I'll raise my hand, sure. And how that affects what we do each week, and just how maybe we should be looking at what all of us would do. I mean, this can go towards people that volunteer. How do people, do we feel like we are having to give of our time, talent, and treasure in the same way? Because, well, I guess, right? That's what we're supposed to do. It's almost, I don't know what the antidote is for someone that feels that way, that maybe they haven't found that reason, or they haven't found that the boundary they're setting in other places to make it so it's not a burden. I don't know what that balance looks like sometimes, even for myself. I mean, I'll admit it. It's, you kind of feel like I'm stretched a little bit too far, and who should I say no to? So I think that even if you don't have maybe if you have a more outgoing personality, it still comes up. So,
well, one of the things that I appreciate about, we are busy. We work probably way more than it would appear from the outside. But one of the things that I do appreciate is the intentionality. I mean, Ken insists that we take a day off during the week, and probably if he didn't, we all would just be working 7 days a week with no break, no Sabbath.
Every other church I've been at, I've worked pretty much 7 days a week. And one of the things that, as I think I probably mentioned before, that when I came here, I took some time to really reflect on what was not going right before. And one of those things was that I was going 7 days a week. And it's an easy thing to do as a pastor because you're like, oh, it's just an hour or two. Oh, it's just an hour or two on Sunday. It's my, Monday's my day off. I'll run to this appointment for 2 or 3 hours, and it's not a big deal. Well, it is a big deal. It starts adding up. This staff is a hardworking staff and at WholeLife, and but one of the things that I have been trying to implement in my life, I remember working in a conference office and having my boss come in. I told him how overwhelmed I was feeling. And my boss would come in to work. He would show up around 6:30 or 7 in the morning. And he would, when I left in the evening, if I was leaving around 6 or 6:30, he was still there. And I remember him saying, oh, Ken, I'm in a different place in life than you. It's okay. Don't worry about it. And yet, and I love this leader. He's phenomenal. But the message I got in my head was I am not living up to what I ought to be. And so one of the things I've really tried to do here at WholeLife is model what I would like to see everybody else doing, that take care of yourself. Because if I'm not doing it, I can tell everybody else to do it. But if I'm not doing it, then it sends another message. And I'm not perfect at this. I'm still trying to, because I love to work. I love what I do. This is like a great job. I mean, I really, to me, if I'm working 7 days a week, I'm not sitting there going, oh, this is awful, I hate it. I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying it until I get to a point where I'm just tired and frazzled and worn out, and I suddenly start finding myself feeling angry and resentful, and I can't figure out why. I'm having a good time.
Oh, darn. Who was it that did this to me again? Oh, yeah, me.
I think it's important that you can always find things to fill your time with. And there's also always places that you can cut. And you may not want to, and you may feel like it's a good thing that you're cutting, but there are always places you can cut, always. And that doesn't necessarily mean you need to cut forever. I mean, I did a devotional with some teachers once about fall and how, and there are seasons when you can do more, and then there's seasons that if a tree, the one that drops its leaves, does the same amount of energy all year round, it would die because it doesn't have the light that it needs. And and I think that that's important with seasons of life too, that there really are times if you do not do less, you will die. But you could do that same thing later, depending on wherever you're at, or maybe even before, or whatever. It's just something. Confusing. It's just something you have to work out between you and God. So nobody can go to anybody else and say this is what you should do and what you shouldn't do. But it also doesn't give you permission to do less. God has the right amount you should be doing. And if serving and giving back, He wants us to be doing that. So if you're never doing that, then you need to look at the whys.
I want to share something, and if Rachelle decides she doesn't like it, Randy knows how to cut it out. But
oh, sorry,
and Randy's laughing now.
Fun.
So,
wow, okay.
Good thing Jeff is here.
But
huh?
no, but yeah, we may need some counseling afterwards, Jeff. But Rachelle shared in her sermon how she started a pre-K program, and how she got burnt out over time. I think she was being kind to me because what she didn't mention is that while she was starting that pre-K program and taking care of her kids, her parents, and her school, she was also my wife, the senior pastor's wife at this church. And so she was doing all these unpaid duties as well. She was showing up to all the baby showers. She's showing up to Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday programs. And so you talk about, here I'm telling you, I'm taking off a day a week. My wife is going 7 days a week. And as much as everybody would like to say, just come, and everybody genuinely means it. So I take nothing away, but everybody's like, oh, you're just a person here. You don't feel like the pastor's wife. You're just, but it's never that way.
It can't be. Yeah.
It's never that way. In as much as people genuinely mean it, it comes from a really good place. It's never that way. And so Rachelle was going 7 days a week, and that led to burnout. And so I was pushing. I was like, hey, it doesn't look good when you're not at church here on Sabbath morning. I need you to, it looks a little strange if I'm sitting by myself up on that front pew. And I hope that, I had people here sometimes say, well, where's Rachelle at? Because one of the things that we've changed in our life is Rachelle doesn't have to be here on Sabbath morning. If she's had a hard week, if she's not feeling well, if things aren't right, and she needs to take some self-care time and watch the service from home because that's the way it needs to be for her to be well, then that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's important for her to take care of herself. And I struggle with that because I'm my background is communications, public relations, and I know how things look. And I know, there's this expectation that your family is there and that there's a certain look and way that people are. But it's been important for Rachelle and I to change those definitions around and say, this is not you're not getting a paycheck for being here. And I'm not getting a paycheck for you being here either. And so we need to, there's still things that obviously, Rachelle, but we've tried to say, what is it that you feel God calling you to do? Where is it that you feel like God needs you to do? And it's been something that I've had to have a mind shift, change myself. And it's one of the things that I think that we have to be really careful with our spouses. And it's not just pastors and their wives and their husbands. It's a lot of us put pressure on our spouses to do things that, do they really need to be doing that? Is that really? And so I think that's something we have to think about a little bit. So I don't know. I think Rachelle's probably okay with me sharing that.
No, I love that because I'm
glad you're okay with it, Randy.
Well,
we all looked at Rachelle expectantly.
We have and here's our good definition of those who are assertive. Randy and I are like, yeah, that's right. And then and Rachelle's like, yeah,
As she sits here in a podcast, kind of mandatory.
Well, I wasn't gonna put her on the spot, so I was just gonna keep on moving just in case. But I think that's healthy though for the podcast and for people to hear and to know that there should be an expectation, and that's a perfect example of things that I think people go to church understand. Or if you've ever had a loved one who was a pastor, and my uncle was a pastor for a long time, had multiple churches, and my aunt was always like, yeah, here we go. And you're always having to be on. Like you said, you don't get that. The expectation is, or has been, that you don't get that time to, well, where's your wife? And it's like, I just think that's a great way to look at it and for us to celebrate that, honestly.
And I want to thank WholeLife for that. When I interviewed for this position, that's one of the things I said in the interview. I said, look, my wife is not a package deal with me. She's an amazing human being. And when where she wants to help out and how she feels God feeling her. But maybe Rachelle doesn't feel called to volunteer at WholeLife. Maybe she feels called to volunteer with another great nonprofit here in the area, or maybe that's where maybe her job, and in fact, I shouldn't say maybe, her job is ministry too.
Absolutely.
She does ministry as somebody who's helping young kids grow and develop. So, I'm always grateful when Rachelle is with me because I like being with my wife. I think and there's so much, this job tends to be so all encompassing. It's hard sometimes to have time together. But that's another thing I've had to realize is that time on the job isn't, a date night, going to the Saturday night social.
Honey, let me sweep you away to prayer meeting.
You mean those?
And it's been so hard for me to understand that.
But I had my arm around you.
I light some candles.
There was boxed Panera there. Come on, that's dinner.
But this
awesome.
church has been incredibly good to us in understanding.
That's awesome.
So I appreciate that. I I felt like somebody was about to say something.
Well, I was just going to say that Rachelle, one of the things that I appreciate is your self-disclosure. And I was fascinated with the story that you told about, Ken asking you, are you mad? Are you angry? And you weren't sure. And I was thinking, wow, I'm the kind of person that's like, let's see, how do I actually feel? Let me go to the thesaurus and find the exact word. I'm feeling truculent. I'm feeling. Those words are for you, Nathaniel. Just, different conversation. But what I appreciated was that, you're sharing from a place of having gone through a process, and I'm curious about two things. One, what was the process of beginning to identify your feelings? And I'll ask that question first. What was that process like when you discovered that you needed to identify those feelings, and how did you work through that?
Let's see. I think it's hard because it was kind of a this built on that kind of thing. But I feel like Brené Brown really hit the nail on the head when I was reading and watching some of her talks about how little people understand about emotional health and how important it is to know that. So I think that was inspiring. I also started logging my feelings. I need to on an app so that I can actually look. And one of the things that's been kind of helpful is it will list like a whole bunch of different ones. And I just go through each one. Okay, do I feel this or don't I? And I just kind of evaluate it, just kind of a starting place. You always learn when you teach. So I teach my kids. I try to teach them my students, different vocabulary, and look for, okay, what would be a healthy way to manage this and that kind of thing. So probably that, just trying to just be more intentional. And then when I do find myself feeling overwhelmed, I try to just take a step back and try to, okay, so how am I feeling right now? What would the names of that be? So just as a practice, it's, you start with one step and then you just keep taking steps.
Rachelle, a question that kind of came up in my mind, I imagine there might be some people out there thinking, well, why does it even matter if you can name your emotions? I mean, why does it matter to be able to put a name on the emotions you're feeling?
Oh, well, Mr. Rogers tells us that anything we can name, I don't know if he doesn't say whatever you can name, you can tame, but he says that anything is manageable if you can speak it or something like that. There's a quote. If you can't label it, you can't identify it. And if you can't identify it, it just ends up working itself out through you in unhealthy ways.
Physically, I mean, it literally can cause you physical illness when you're not able to manage the emotional illness or hurt or pain that you're feeling. And so,
well, and the other thing is, as I've studied social emotional, your feelings like anger, for example, you may not know, or maybe you do, that anger is a secondary emotion. It's usually followed very quickly, but there's usually a core emotion that comes before that anger. And so the before emotion is important to identify if you want to understand your anger. Your anger often is just trying to protect you. But when you pay attention to those feelings, they are usually telling you something important in life. For example, angry could be telling you that there's a boundary that needs to be defined that you're ignoring in your own life. And so you need to understand that. Or angry could be that you need more sleep. I mean, it could be a lot of things, but taking the time to understand the why helps you make the adjustments you need to make.
I like the sounds of that.
Melanie, did you have a second question?
I do have a second question, and I would like you to tell us the truth.
Okay.
Rachelle. You secretly preach at other places, don't you? This can't be the first time you've ever preached a whole sermon.
So the official sermon, yes. I've not actually preached a sermon before. I have done a few, very few, smaller group settings. I did address a pastor's wife group once, talking about things. I did recently do some professional development for my school on social emotional health and stuff. And so that was, or learning, I guess is what it was. But that was like really a co-thing. But it's people more sitting in a circle or with tables, and there's more interaction. I'm trying to think. I did do a testimony kind of sermon with Ken once, but that was, again, only like a 10-ish minute thing compared to...
Yeah.
So, but that's about it.
Actually, I was really just giving you a hard time. That was my sort of backwards way of paying you a compliment.
Well, I'm going to give you...
I
no,
believe you.
but no. But it's, I don't know. I enjoy... I don't know. I don't know how to...
I think you were almost about to say you enjoyed it.
Yeah, and
I think-
now
I think
that I
that's-
know that
I
you
do.
have this hidden talent, that might be a problem for
But she
you.
knows
very-
whole life that
well-
if she says she's enjoying it, that it comes back.
I feel like, just like everybody that I'm ever talking to, people don't know so much about social emotional skills. And I feel like it's really important. And I admire Mr. Rogers so much. And the only way you can really help people is to be talking. And so I don't know that I have to get up and do sermons, but I very much am looking for ways to give back, because I don't think that there's any point in knowing stuff if you're just going to hoard it.
Well, something this important as well, definitely. All right, let's get to the questions. It was slow. And then when Haas put out the warning that, guess what, we're taping the podcast this afternoon. If you want your questions answered, you have to give them now. It was like, and they started just piling in. So Aaron said, I resonate so much with what Rachelle is saying. How do you know when you're doing self-care that is not selfish, or if it is me being selfish? I really struggle with this because I feel like I'm selfish when I say no, for example, or I'm not doing what someone else wants if it is something that isn't a sin to do. So how do you know when you are doing self-care that is not selfish, or when you're being selfish? How do you know that?
I think you can only know that with your own reflection and time with God, as well as, kind of working the steps that I laid out in my sermon, I guess, because I don't think that there is a clear-cut answer that's the same for me as it is for somebody else. I think you can know you're being selfish if you're finding yourself being lonely, angry, bitter, and upset. And I think you can know you're doing too much if you're finding those same feelings. And I think the balance of the two, which is peace, positive, you're thriving emotionally. If you're not thriving emotionally, you need to figure out why and what adjustments you need to make. And why are you feeling guilty about being selfish? Figure out those reasons why. And it will take time. I mean, it's taken me a long time to get to the place where I'm willing to say no to things that I didn't think I used to be able to say no to. I used to think I have to do this, and I have to meet everybody else's expectations. And the truth is, you really just don't.
Yeah. Well, I thought, go ahead.
And I just want to just jump in and say I really appreciate what Rachelle said, is like, you don't always have to say no. You can say, let me think about that.
Yeah.
And give yourself a little bit of time to say, is this good for me? Is this okay, so this is a good thing to do. There's nothing immoral with doing it. But am I able to stay up with what Rachelle said? Am I able to continue doing my self-care practices? Is taking this new thing on going to mean that I can't exercise anymore, that I'm not able to do worship when I was planning on doing it? Does it mean that I'm going to take time away from other things? I had a mentor who used to tell me, he said, every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And so it's important to know what you're wanting to do and what's important. So if you're saying yes, I'll do this, you might be having to say no to spending time with your children when they're available, or you might be saying no to having a meal at a healthy time for you. Which, again, all those things can pile up on each other. So really look at that list that Rachelle had in the sermon. You can go back onto our website and you can look up the sermon. And she had a couple lists that I thought they were really good. They offered you some really concrete ways to kind of know when to say yes and when to say no.
I think the other thing is it's really easy to live inside of a box and think your options are this or this, which maybe you can't do something every day or even once a week. Maybe the answer is to do it once a month. And so I think to explore other ways of meeting a goal and not sacrificing everything else could be to just get creative.
Not all or nothing.
Yeah, it's not always all or nothing.
Well, I like that you basically laid out that it's a balance, because either way, if you do it wrong on either side, you end up lonely, angry, and bitter. So it's like, you better figure out the balance, because either side, it brings you to the same place. And I wonder how often those of us that with different personalities are feeling the same thing, but we don't resonate with the other side because our lonely, angry, and bitter is a different, but it's for different reasons. And you go, this, like how can we find this, both find balance in the same place? And brings us to Matt and Aaron, which essentially asked the same question. Matt said, which one should we trust the most, head, heart, or gut? And Aaron said, how do you tell the difference between your head, your heart, and your gut? So how do we tell the difference? And then once we know which one we're supposed to trust, then which one should we trust the most?
All right. Well, your head is going to be the thoughts in your head, just the stuff that you're thinking. Your gut is going to be those feelings. You can actually feel, if you're paying attention to your emotions, you actually physically feel emotions as well. And so you're paying attention to where in your body you're feeling it. And I don't know, it's weird, but you get gut feelings that's different than necessarily your head thinking. Like how many times have it been like, I know gut that I should be doing this, but my logic is telling me something different. There is a conflict with that. And then your heart tends to focus specifically on your emotional intelligences and what you really want and what you really don't want. That's not necessarily logical.
I always say I'll put my wife's gut against anyone. Every time she's got a gut feeling, and she'll go, my gut's telling me to do this, but I really want to do this. Your gut is telling you what you should do, because it probably knows you as well without any interference. It's just giving you the raw data, I feel like. And then your heart's like, yeah, but, and your head's like, what are you, crazy? Don't you remember what happened before? And so there was something that just happened recently, and she's like, you know what? I should have trusted my gut. The gut's always right. And I think, maybe it's a little bit of finding out how your body or how you deal best with situations that come up and play the odds.
There's a lot of movies and messages in the world that says, your gut, follow your heart, think things through, that kind of stuff. I think, honestly, if you are going to prioritize one area of your body over the other, you're going to be cheating yourself out of the messages your body is sending you. I honestly think that they have different functions. And if you actually take the time to write out everything and you pray over it, I think clarity comes.
Okay.
But I don't think you can say that you should discard one over the other. I think that is cheating yourself out of important messages your body's sending you. That's my personal opinion. I don't know, Jeff, what would you say?
Well, I was just going to say, first of all, we're really pretty nuanced, complicated beings to think that you're right. If you're just going to go on one, that's not how we work. And we don't have just one feeling to identify. We've got multiple feelings to identify. So one of the things I think that would help is if we look at it from the other side. And that is, a lot of times we make decisions out of fear or avoidance.
Yep.
And so if I know if I can walk through that, so a lot of times what I do is I end up just saying yes or working hard or moving into something that keeps me busy so I don't have to walk through that. So, if you know that you're avoiding something or if you're keeping something from that process, then it probably is going to be in your best interest to walk through that first before. In other words, if I'm having a hard time deciding, that may be a really good indication that you need to spend, like Ken said, a little bit more time walking through that kind of that processing.
Coyote said, "Thank you, Mrs. Pastor. You were talking to me." So they definitely resonated with the message. And Mr. C said, "Your yes does not mean anything until your no means something. All people deserve to be seen. The skill of spotting the unseen can be developed." I think that's true in all cases. So I would say we agree with you, Mr. C. Anonymous said, I feel we have a responsibility, especially as Christians, to see the Marthas amongst us and help them out. I believe she really wanted to be seen just like her sister Mary. Do you think there are more female people pleasers than male? I thought that was anonymous. That was the last question. It came in just before the chat went off. And I was like, ooh, there we go. Battle of the sexes. Is it more? Do you think there's one more than another?
Yeah, there are statistics that support
Is
that.
Is that the statistic? Okay.
Yeah.
I was guessing, but I didn't know. Yeah. Is it a big margin? Or
I didn't look at it
specifically, but
I know that when I was researching it, it says it referred to that, but I didn't do a deep dive. I don't know. Maybe you know more than me.
I'm sure it's probably cultural how we understand it, but yeah, I've never seen a statistic on it. I don't even know if there is a way of measuring that, but
it was like this one of the it was just women can tend to struggle with this more, but it was like but I didn't do a deep dive to see what that actually meant or whatever, but I know there was a comment on that as I was reading.
And we have one more from our very special friend right here in Orlando, brand new member. He's an in-house member every week though. I think you'll recognize him. It's Ganashville Tim. And that's his new title. The old chat booted him out, and he had to create a new one, and he wouldn't let him use Nashville, so
that's
he had
hilarious.
to put
O-Town Tim. I like that one.
Yeah, no, he won't adopt it. I've tried to get him. He's still hanging on though.
All right.
Maybe later.
He's a stubborn one. That
but
guy.
wait a minute, now he's officially official, so maybe now he should be O-Town Tim.
Yeah,
I'm gonna talk to him
true.
next week.
Yeah,
we'll see. Maybe we can talk him into. You guys are going to be gone next week. Maybe we can. We should have him on the podcast.
Okay.
Because we could use an extra person.
There you go.
There you go. Here we go. He said it seems possible to be a God pleaser, accepting everything from the Bible and being happy about anything religious or spiritual. For this kind of person, would it possibly create a more healthy relationship with God if we do some questioning or even arguing with God?
I always think it's good to any relationship that has any kind of depth has conflict. And so if you have no conflict with God, I very respectfully want to and gently question the depth of your relationship.
You are so good with that. Did you see how she just? Now, where was she last week?
Not like Ken with the bull in a china.
When Ken said the truth is progressive, like it. Last week, we got
some feedback on that.
Yeah, Mariana, thank you for the feedback. After you had to go in, we talked about it some more, and it was good. But I just appreciated how gently and how you just landed that plane. Like if that was a flight, we're like, oh, we're on the ground. Wow,
Applause.
Exactly. Yeah, tip your pilot on the way out, please. That was good. No, I agree. I think that without some conflict or without some questioning, it almost makes me feel like I'm not invested. Like, how could I be invested if I agree with every last thing or everything that maybe I don't understand? So I would agree.
So I think she's agreeing with you, Tim.
Yeah. Well, you got the Rachelle positive gold star today. Yeah. Teacher gold star.
And I think something that people pleasers struggle with a lot is conflict. And professionally, I have figured out how to manage conflict pretty well, I feel like. And what I've discovered is, for whatever reason, it's easier professionally. But if you do a good job of listening and hearing somebody out and working through a problem, there's connection on the other side. And so I think the same is true with our relationship with God, that if you go to God with your honest self, that's not trying to be a behaved Christian for God as if he doesn't know the real you. But if you're allowing yourself to be real in front of God, that conflict is going to show up. But in the end, it's going to create connection. So I don't think so. As much as I have feared conflict in my life, if conflict is done correctly, it actually pulls you towards people, not away.
Do you ever see a time or envision a time when you're like, conflict? bring it on. Let's do this. Like has your realizations in your work personally on yourself and how you deal with conflict personally, professionally, do you feel like it's not as big a deal before, or that you'll ever arrive at a place where you're just like, I don't think this is such a big deal. Let's just do this and get it over with, or you don't have that as much of an uncomfortable?
I don't know. I think that the people who know you closest are always going to be the people that are the hardest to have conflict with, because they push on your blind spots that you don't really want to see. And I think you always don't want to see things, and you always have to be fighting against that need to, that desire to have that pride, or I don't know, whatever it is. And so I think that's just kind of a result of being in a fallen world. Yeah. And I think but I do think, ultimately when we're in heaven and Jesus makes everything right again, then I think that's where we'll land. But here on this earth, selfishness and personal short sights are always going to be hard to be dealing with. And it's just teaching yourself to be okay and work through that process. But I can't even tell you how many times Ken and we've been through just so much, and we're like, yay, we're there, and then no, we're not. And so and I just I don't know.
It's true though. There's times when you feel like everything is just so right with the world, with your relationship, your marriage, and it's like, wait a minute, like 2 days later it's like, what happened? Weren't we just all in this in a happy place? And like you said though, I think it's the blind spots or the soft spots that we don't see, or that we don't know we're pushing, and maybe we don't even realize we're being pushed, but subconsciously things work, and then it just comes to a head. And it's like, the communication, everyone's like, communication, it's so important. And it's really true, because it's only when you are communicating that, and you're willing to say, I don't even know what's wrong, but I'm a little miffed at you and I don't know why. And I think that's okay to say too. It's like, I don't know why I'm mad at you, but I am. And so let's just put that out there and see what happens.
Well, and as much as we as humans always hate this, if we are not challenging ourselves, we're not growing. If you're just flying even, then you're coasting, yes, and that might be easy. And you might need to take a break and do that every once in a while, but we're going to need to grow for the rest of our lives. And so you're going to have that wrestle.
But that's not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing as long as you can.
I mean, you're saying that with a smile on your face, like we're going to have to grow. And, a lot of times we hear that and you're like, oh, geez, got to grow, got to do more work, got to do more.
It can be rewarding.
You're right. But it can be rewarding if you
have the right mindset. Right. It's called a growth mindset. That's an education term, but yes.
So look that up and get good with it. Google it.
There you go. Google it. Google it.
Rachelle did.
Dr. Google can help you.
Google done changed my life. So there you go. I think it's a good place for us to wrap it up. Rachelle, thank you so much for your message. I really enjoyed it. I only caught it once, and usually I usually get 2 or 3 cracks at it before we sit down for a podcast, but you carried the show. So you had everything in place, and it was.
This was a great service. We had,
everything was good.
We had the choir. We had Ken as our host. We had Rachelle's sermon, and we had surprise, amazing closing special music by Eric.
I know, right?
If you haven't watched the service, I think you should probably go watch it once or twice or 3 times.
And if you missed the message, swipe up in today's show notes. You will find a link to Speaking of Grace, is where you will find Rachelle's message from this week. And make sure to check it out. Or you can watch it on YouTube, Facebook. You can go to our feeds there and you'll find them there as well. Next week, we continue on. It's just going to be maybe the Nashville Bachmans and Randy next week.
Hey, you never know.
I know it won't just be that, because our guest speaker next week is Audrey Gregory.
That's it.
It's going to be fantastic.
And Audrey, I know I've seen her. She sings
she sings with our praise team.
With the praise team, yep. And then she's an exec at Advent Health, I believe. I believe I've interviewed her there before as well. So I am looking forward to her message. And so if you have anything that you want to add to this, as always, 407-965-1607 or podcast at Hospital Church. Whoa, where did that? I just said Advent Health.
Wait a minute.
Woo, at podcast@wholelife.church. Thank you very much. Wow, every once in a while that still comes out. There's still more episodes of that than there is of This Is Whole
okay,
Life, so
Randy,
it's hard.
You're still growing.
I'm still, yeah.
Growth past.
I'm a work in progress. So thank you all for listening and have a great week.